All right, I think we're good to get started. So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Allyship and Aerospace panel, presented by the Diversity and Inclusion Group within Women of Aeronautics and Astronautics. My name is Harshini Sivakumar, and I am an undergraduate student at Georgia Tech studying aerospace engineering, as well as the Expansion Subcommittee Chair on WoAA's National Board. Before we get started with today's panel, I'd like to take a minute to address something that might be on the minds of all of you tuning in today. Today's panel, which features panelists typically seen as the majority in their organizations and spaces, may have elicited shock or surprise from you at first glance. After a lot of internal discussion, WoAA's board and the D&I leads made the intentional decision to feature these panelists to push back on the all too common idea that diversity and inclusion spaces are not for those in the majority. This idea was inspired by our previous panel, Microaggressions and Promoting Anti-Racism in Aerospace, which you can find on our YouTube channel, where it was consistently noted that issues of inclusivity cannot fall entirely on underrepresented groups to address and fix. Allies help amplify marginalized voices and can push for cultural changes at all levels of their organizations. Our goal today is to reach those who are not marginalized and may not know how to help in their respective spaces. We are actively working to put on more events in the future that highlight the amazing contributions of underrepresented groups in aerospace, and we welcome any and all feedback about this or future events. In addition, we will be hosting an open D&I meeting on September 1st from 7:30 to 8:30 p.m. EST for anyone to attend and share your thoughts, so please be on the lookout for that information on our social media platforms. In addition, to meet this specific moment, we need to emphasize that the allyship we will be discussing is all-encompassing, including not only gender allyship, but racial allyship as well. While strides have been made, there is still room to grow in all areas. The purpose of this panel is to highlight and address all forms of allyship, and we hope that this conversation will prompt you all to bring racial allyship to the forefront of the conversation and be all-encompassing allies to everyone around you. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our moderator for this afternoon's event, Dr. Camille Alleyne. Dr. Alleyne is a rocket designer, space scientist, trailblazer, and all-around amazing person, and we are so honored to have her here today. Her commitment to service and making a difference in the lives of young people is nothing short of inspiring. Thank you so much, Dr. Alleyne, and please take it away.
Thank you so much, Harshini, for those thoughtful and inspiring words. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today to have this conversation on allyship in aerospace. Before we get started with our panelists, I wanted to take a moment to honor the young women who organized this event. Their voices are so strong at such a young age, and their commitment to creating diverse, inclusive, equitable, and just workspaces in aerospace for all of us is inspiring. When they first asked me to moderate this panel, I had some questions and some reservations. I wanted to know why they thought this conversation was worth having, what they were hoping to get out of it, and how did they determine who to invite to the table to have this conversation. We talked, and I was impressed with how deliberate, intentional, and thoughtful they were in seeing the value in and creating spaces to have these conversations. I haven't been in aerospace for more than 25 years, not counting my college years, and I have seen and experienced a lot, especially as a Black woman in predominantly white male spaces. But we find ourselves in a moment in time in our country where so many are asking, how do we keep the faith and move forward and continue to forge a more just and equitable society? It is my belief that it will take everyone coming to the table with open hearts and minds and a willingness to roll up their sleeves and fight for a better society. Frankly, a willingness to be a better human. So it is my pleasure to be here to moderate this conversation on gender and racial allyship in aerospace. And now I'd introduce our panelists. First, we have Lieutenant General James, the Deputy Director of NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, who has championed allyship through his sponsorship for the International Astronautical Congress Diversity Day breakfast, advocated for spectral diversity within JPL, and facilitating inclusive luncheons with employees across 6,000 scientists, engineers, technicians, and business support personnel. Welcome, General James. Next, we have Mr. Rob Myerson, the former president of Blue Origin and Ascend Conference executive producer, who has championed allyship through his Ascend Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion virtual panels, bringing important conversations to large audiences and overseeing Blue Origin's growth in staff from 10 to 1,500. Welcome, Mr. Myerson. Then we have Mr. Will Pomerantz, the Vice President for Special Projects at Blue Origin, who co-founded the Brooke Owens Fellowship. This program specifically caters to women and gender minorities of all backgrounds looking to pursue a career in the aerospace industry. Will believes that strong mentorship and employment opportunities early on can make a huge difference in helping gender minorities achieve their full potential. Welcome, Will.
Thanks for having me.
Next, we have Dr. Matt Marcus, a NASA Goddard engineer and the Technical Development Subcommittee Chair for WoAA National Board, who has championed allyship through his work destigmatizing the role of male allies in women's organizations. Welcome, Matt. And lastly, but not least, we have Carson Corsi, an undergraduate student at Georgia Tech and a Northrop Grumman's intern, who has championed allyship at the collegiate level through his support in engineering and design competition teams. Welcome, Carson.
Thanks for having me.
Let's get started. The first question is on allyship and privilege, and it's for all our panelists. Sometimes privilege appears to be in a way that may rub potential allies in the wrong way and discourage them from recognizing their privilege in a healthy way. What does privilege mean to you? And what advice do you have for other allies for dissecting this word? Like to start.
Well, Camille, I can say a couple of words on that. I think, frankly, in today's environment, privilege is somewhat of a loaded term. So we all have to be careful how we talk and explain that. But the way I have talked about it, and I think others, is that, frankly, we all start in different places in life. That's just a truth. You don't decide where you're born. You don't decide who your parents are. So we all start in different places. And I think we all recognize and understand that. And frankly, we all start with different opportunities depending on where we are and those situations. So in my mind, and talking about it in that way, you kind of set the table in a way that people can understand and talk about versus frankly using some potentially loaded terms like privilege that we all can, I think, gather around and say, yeah, we all start at a different place and that can result in different opportunities and different outcomes. So that's one way to think about it.
Thank you, General.
Yeah, Camille, I'll take the next thing. I think I agree with Larry, and I think it's easy to get a little defensive when talking about privilege. In my personal story, my parents went through a business bankruptcy when I was in my early teens, so things went from pretty good to really, really tough very quickly. But upon self-reflection and over the last couple of decades, I recognized really how incredibly privileged I was growing up, and in so many ways. And so I think it requires a little self-reflection too when you think about it in terms of your situation. Like Larry said, we all came from different places. Our definition of how privileged we were or not is based on our own experiences as well. So I encourage others to self-reflect and think about it.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's certainly. Go ahead, Carson.
Thank you. I just like to kind of add on to what Rob said there. It's, privilege can sometimes have kind of a negative connotation. But I really think it's just as simple as what Lieutenant General James said, and that it's just as simple as we all start from different places. And I would really advise other people when they think in terms of privilege to, shy away from using it as, in a negative connotation, but more offered up something that can be used to better people that don't have that privilege.
Great, Carson.
Yeah, I just say, privilege is not a synonym of spoiled. It doesn't mean that everything's been handed to you on a silver platter. It doesn't mean your life has been easy. It doesn't mean every bit of success you've had has been given to you or guaranteed. You can be in a privileged group or lots of privileged groups and still have worked very hard for what you've gotten. It just means that, probably your race or your gender or your last name or your passport isn't one of the things that's making your life harder. And I'm certainly far from the first person to make that analogy there, but it is, as everyone has said, it doesn't have to be a negative thing. It's you got dealt some lucky cards in your deck of cards, and not everyone else got the same ones. They might have gotten some better ones than you. In some cases, you got some better ones than them, and you should recognize that and be grateful for it and share it when you can.
Great, thank you all.
Yeah, I think I'd echo, basically what everyone, and especially like what Carson said, that, it shouldn't be viewed as a negative, and it's, basically in helping people realize how they got to where they were, people that do have that privilege. Sort of once you recognize that, you recognize, or you at least start to realize, you identify areas where you should, change things to make the same opportunities available for people that haven't had that.
Great, thank you, Matt. So the next question is for all of you. How do you convey opportunities and possibilities to those who might not know what options might be available to them, or those who have constantly been asked or told they don't belong in engineering or STEM, etc.?
I'll maybe start out, Camille. First of all, I think, especially if you're in a large organization or in an organization, you have to have a plan to reach out to those communities and encourage. And I'll just use an example from JPL, where we bring in 30 to 40,000 elementary and high school kids to see JPL every year, before COVID, of course. But to give them the opportunity to see what the possibilities are when, we deal with LA Unified School District, where I think 80 or 90% of the kids are on school lunch program and so on. So you've just got a lot of young kids who don't even understand the possibilities. And I love to tell this story. This was at the National Space Club Gala several years ago, where they give a big scholarship to a college individual, and they have that individual get up and give a speech. This is back in Washington, D.C. in the big Hilton Ballroom. And so this young man gets up there and he talks about that he was raised in East LA in a single mom family. His brother was in gangs. He was headed down the same path, and his school took a trip to JPL. And he said, that changed my life. So that showed me the possibilities of what could be. And now he was an aerospace engineering major, I think, at Illinois or Indiana. So I think just showing kids in high school and elementary school what the possibilities are is something we as allies can take on and be very serious about. So I'll stop there.
Fantastic. Thank you.
I think also.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I think also just active mentoring. I'm not in a large organization like Larry is. I'm consulting now, but so doing what you can in terms of working with organizations like the Museum of Flight and the Brooke Owens Fellowship and the Matthew Isaacsowicz Fellowship, and help folks understand. Obviously the Museum of Flight maybe getting people a little bit early in their career, but having an opportunity to be in a place where you can answer people's questions, and so I think mentoring is important. So
Great.
I'd also add, sort of on a personal level, I think that sort of reaching out to people individually is very important. A lot of people, especially I've noticed with like women and underrepresented minorities in aerospace, they have a lot of the same skills that people that, they may compare themselves to with privilege in the industry have. But they don't see it that way. A lot of people, feel like they're not qualified unless they meet, sort of like all of the qualifications, and they put people that are currently working in the field up on a pedestal. So I think if you can draw comparisons to specific skills that they have that, qualify them to be doing the same work that these people that they see as up on this pedestal are doing, that, goes a long way to making them realize that they're just as capable as anyone else.
Mhm. And I'd like to add there, kind of similar to what Lieutenant General James said, but more specifically, I think if you have a technical organization, you should really think about, what can you be doing actively to show examples? Because something that, people might not really think that high school rocketry and elementary school outreach go really well together. But something that I'm really proud of and excited about and doing as part of my time in the Rocket Club here at Georgia Tech, getting out in elementary schools and, showing them our hardware and giving them presentations, and maybe on those presentations I'm able to show pictures of some of the women and minorities on our team that are able to do amazing things. So that's something that I think is really important to consider as well. Just getting out, thinking how you can turn your technical organization also into an outreach organization that's able to show people examples in the real world.
And I'll just add, I think all of us who work in these industries of aeronautics and astronautics, we have an incredible privilege, every one of us, and a responsibility that comes along with the fact that pretty much all of us really love what we do, and so does everyone else. Everywhere you go, if people find out that you work, if you work putting robots on Mars, if you work building rockets, whatever your role in the industry is, people want to talk to you about it, and they want to introduce you to their kids. They want to bring you into their school to speak at career day. They want to feature you on television. They want to hear about this stuff. And not everybody gets that, right? There's people who work in industries that are just as challenging as ours and just as important for the future of humanity as ours, that just, they don't resonate quite as well, or they're not TV friendly, or they're not something that can be understood by kids at quite a young an age as aerospace can. So we've got that opportunity. We have that platform, which is really wonderful. I think it's incumbent upon us to use it well, and to think about, okay, how can I translate these really highly technical things into terminology that's going to make sense to a non-technical audience? I suspect every one of you participating in this Q&A or watching has had the experience of going to see an aerospace professional that you really looked up to give a speech and being bored because they threw around like lots of acronyms, or they assume that you remember exactly what happened on October 4th, 1957, and they won't explain what it was, right? It just goes over your head. And that's such a wasted opportunity. You got to think about your audience. You got to translate it in terms that are going to connect with them, with their skills, with the things that benefit them in their communities. And they're really, really, really going to listen to you if you do that. And if you couple that with all the other great advice that the other panelists give about showing examples of trailblazers who have already gone the way, about making it clear that I have yet to see a single piece of scientific evidence anywhere that says mathematics ability is related to gender or race, that science ability is related to gender or race. Race doesn't even really have a scientific bias as far as I can tell. And so trying to show people that, yep, you can still be in this. In fact, we really need you. Like, this industry needs more people, it needs more smart people, regardless of their body shape or skin color or anything else. That's a message that people have a hard time believing at first, but get really, really excited when it connects with them.
Absolutely, I agree. Thank you to all of you for your enlightening answers. Okay, let's switch gears now and talk a little bit about problems that you've encountered practicing allyship. How do you handle pushback against D&I initiatives at your institutions? How do you respond to people who do not understand that there is a need for allyship? And this is to all of the panelists.
I can start off on this one. I think it's just as easy as having discussions with people. I run into a lot of people that don't recognize the value in diversity. Who don't recognize that's we lack that in our aerospace industry, in our engineering industry. And I think it's very important to not, your first reaction might be to kind of get angry, upset with those people, but you really just need to have honest and open discussions with them and just really try to get the point across that it's important for a lot of reasons, but there are also very tangible reasons that kind of like Will is saying, we need people from all different genders, races, body types, all of that. And a really great concrete example of that is, seatbelts, for example. I'm sure a lot of you have heard, the statistic on seatbelts. Women are much more likely to, be injured in a car crash because seatbelts weren't designed, of people that have, some of their body types, and so they just didn't consider that maybe they need to be thinking about women and when they design these seatbelts. So they're very tangible, explainable reasons that we need to have diversity in our industries, and I think those are really easy ways to discuss those with people that might not, understand that this is a serious issue.
Yeah, even pregnant women, right?
Yes, absolutely.
I'll say in my experience of allyship, first of all, there hasn't been an enormous amount of pushback. Anyone who is being timid about becoming an ally, I'll say, don't really worry about it. It's going to happen. It's a big world out there and everyone has their own opinions. And also it's 2020 and everyone is incensed about everything all the time. So it's not zero, but on the whole, the more active I have become as an ally, the greater the response has been from, certainly from friends and family, but from all my colleagues. Most people get it. Most people are excited about it. There are a few people who don't. You don't really have to convince all of them. And if you try to, you'll probably be tilting at windmills. But there are some who are convincible. And if you can not just have one argument, if you can have 20 different arguments, I think you're more likely to do it. I personally believe that there is a moral argument for diversity and inclusion that is entirely sufficient. That should be enough for everyone, but it isn't. Some people want the pragmatic answer. They want to know, okay, they want to see the statistics about companies with better gender equity on their boards perform better in the stock market, or teams that have more of a diverse makeup come up with faster ideas and implement them better. Thankfully, those statistics all exist. And if you find out that you're talking to one of those people, there are a couple statistics you can memorize or links that you can have saved on your phone or whatever else and pass it off. And if you get someone who doesn't buy the moral case yet, but they get the practical case, often the moral case follows. I wish it went the other way, but hey, if that's what it takes to get them down the road, I think that that's still a win.
And Camille, I'm sorry, go ahead, Rob.
No, go ahead, Larry. Yeah, you go ahead.
I was just gonna follow up on that. Working with 6,000 scientists and engineers, they do like data and statistics. I would also say, as Will said, I don't see it as a large problem. I wouldn't say that there's been massive pushback in any of these areas in terms of being allies. But as Will said, the statistics show that creative teams with diverse views perform better. It's just a fact. And then you tell stories. The story of how you come up with how you land a rover on Mars took incredible diverse opinions. It was fighting tooth and nail over many months on how can this happen with a multitude of different ideas. And if you have everyone with the same mindset and the same background, you're simply not going to get there. And so I think those two statistics, or those two things, the stats, which prove it, and then telling stories about why it really works in your organization and here's how it did happen, really just go a long way in terms of showing, yeah, this is exactly the right thing we should be doing.
I couldn't agree more. I just wanted to add to something Will said. If you don't see pushback in the organization, I would be pretty concerned because we know in 2020 there is going to be some level of opposition to D&I initiative. People are going to ask for data. People are going to push back in different ways, and we want to make sure that we get that pushback and we shine. We get those discussions out in the open and have those arguments so that we can get closer. You're not going to convince everybody yet now, but it's important to have those discussions and keep moving forward. So.
Thank you.
I think I would just add on to what Rob said that, I think you can eventually convince everyone, or at least most people, but people, especially, the type of people that you would get that pushback from, people listen to those that they trust and those that share somewhat common opinions with them. So, if you can sort of reach out to people that maybe you'll get a little pushback from, but like fairly minimal and already, mostly agree with you, everyone can sort of reach out to someone that's one step away and move everyone in the right direction.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Okay, this question is for General James. what advice would you give to leaders of enormous STEM space organizations like JPL or the Air Force as far as how leaders can elevate and empower underrepresented demographics? And how can leaders and hiring managers be more proactive about this rather than simply paying a dedication to diverse and inclusive organizations as lip service?
Okay, so how can leaders empower and elevate? I think you kind of hit upon the key point. It is about leadership. You have to have your leadership team walking the walk and talking the talk all the time. It has to be a part of their ethos. It has to be a part of the message they're conveying down through the organization. You know, if the director and the deputy director, they're saying it, but none of the direct reports are, or if they're not living it out, you know, it's not going to happen. So number one, I think it starts with leadership, you know, and that has to be infusing all the way down through your leadership structure. And frankly, it has to be a part of how you select your leaders as you look at who they are and how they've operated and the results they've achieved. So I would say it starts with leadership. Sometimes it is a cultural change. So you have to recognize that you're not just going to give some people some training and flip a switch and suddenly you're in nirvana. It is a journey, but it has to be a journey that we all recognize that we're continually on, and then drive that down into the organization. And then in terms of the hiring, it does come back to data in a way. I mean, you do want to be looking at how are you doing in this arena and where are those areas that you can get better. As I said, we're a data-driven organization, so if I can show the data, I can say, here's an area we need to go after. And I'll give you an example with HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities. Frankly, we all are challenged there. And so we've, over the last several years, tried to develop abilities to bring professors and students onto the lab, give them an experience working a project, reaching out, being engaged with those particular colleges and universities. But so it says leaders have to be involved, show the data, and then develop areas of improvement to attack those gaps that you identified in the data. And that's a way to go.
Fantastic. I'm an alum of Howard University, so I can help you with that.
Absolutely.
This question is for Rob. Can you talk about how during the astronomical growth of Blue Origin team from 10 to over 1,200 individuals, you ensure that you were not hiring for technical prowess, but also for diversity of thought and background, particularly with regard to bringing women, non-binary individuals, and ethnic and racial minorities into the rapidly growing company?
Sure. I think first off, I want to talk to. I've been in the aerospace industry 35 years, so I'd like to answer based on my entire career experience, not just from Blue Origin, but first off, you need to start very, very early and build the culture of your organization to be one that is accepting of diversity. And so some of the things over the course of my career that I've done, first off, a supporter and a mentor for the Brooke Owens and Matthew Isaac-Witz Fellowship. I think these are really, really important organizations that are bringing a unique perspective to the aerospace industry. I've also aligned myself with organizations that embrace diversity and bring forward different points of view. I mentioned the Museum of Flight here in Seattle, but also my alma mater, the University of Michigan, University of Washington, MIT, Arizona State, and University of Texas at El Paso. I created some new graduate hiring programs and new graduate rotation that's focused on teaching technical skills and including a formal mentoring assignment for early career people. I've created and served as the executive sponsor for internship programs that can bring more diverse workforce into the organization, and I've created a unique Women's Weekend event with university students and faculty. That is an ongoing concern now, and also recruited university professors to spend their sabbaticals with the organization in the past. And in many cases, that provided a very, very important technical female role model for young professionals. So those are some things that I've done that have, you know, helped to fill the funnel of hiring in past organizations and provide diverse candidates to interview. Over time, these programs have been expanded to include more racially diverse candidates from the National Society of Black Engineers and Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers. And so I think it's just critically important to be intentional because diversity doesn't happen on its own. It's really something that you have to work at and be intentional about. And I want to just put, you know, my work in the past maybe 5 years has more been focused on women and in aerospace. And I looked at that and upon reflection and working with Ascend and the work we've done with the National Society of Black Engineers, these recent diversity, equity, and inclusion webinars have been very useful in opening up and in expanding that aperture a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I echo that. It takes intentionality, right? And then the more you practice, then, you know, it just becomes part of the ethos. So thank you so much.
Sure.
Will, this is for you. Can you speak to your approach in most effectively serving as a mentor to marginalized individuals for the Brooke Owens Fellowship and for Techstars?
Yeah, certainly. Well, I'll just say to begin, I love being a mentor. I find it rewarding, and I also just find it a lot of fun. There's very few things I do in life that have a higher gear ratio, if you will, than mentoring a young person, right? Because something that doesn't cost me that much time or effort can make an enormous change in another person's life. And I think that's fulfilling for anyone, right? One email I send introducing person A to person B, or one article I recommend that they read, or one graduate school I tell them exists that they didn't know about, that can literally change the entire trajectory of a person's life. And that is pretty incredible. And if you want to talk about gear ratios, often the less privileged that person is, the bigger the gear ratio is, right? Because things that you know, many of us thought were obvious that informed the early steps in their career, they may have never been exposed to that at all. And so it is really, really fun. It's really, really rewarding, especially when you can sort of follow these incredibly exponential career paths and say, I knew him back then, or I knew them back then, that I knew her back then. That's a really wonderful thing to do. I think some of the keys to being a good mentor, first of all, is just trying to remember what you were like at a similar position in your, not necessarily life, in your sort of knowledge acquisition, because it could have come at a very different point in your life when you asked these questions or got exposed to these things. And that will help, I think, remember that even the most intelligent and driven of people can have very basic questions. It doesn't mean that they're not smart. And you shouldn't assume, because you know they're smart, you shouldn't assume that they don't have basic questions, right? A super smart, very driven 20-year-old may know absolutely nothing about how to apply to graduate school because they've never known anyone who did it, right? And I shouldn't assume that they've already thought about graduate schools and they already have their top 10 picked out and they know what professor they want to work with. That's a really poor assumption. So asking about those things, being open to them really helps. The other thing I've sort of learned and has been reinforced with me a lot the last couple of years in particular is that really smart people often have no idea what to do with a mentor because they maybe have never had one before. You know, I came from a privileged enough background. I was around lots of smart people as a kid, and I learned at a young age how to ask them questions, how to be in a conversation with them, how to not be terribly intimidated by that, and a lot of them don't. And so I've been set up through organizations like Brooke Owens Fellowship or SEDS, the Students for the Exploration and Development of Space, with young people who are really smart, and I'll be set up as their mentor, and I'll realize that they've never emailed me. And they've never asked for a call. And I sort of tend to think as a mentor, okay, they'll take the first step because they know I'm busy. And sometimes like, oh no, they just don't know that they're supposed to do that. They don't want to bother me. They think I'm so busy and that's the reason they shouldn't email me. I've got to initiate this, right? And then sometimes you'll go to that first conversation and you'll realize, oh my goodness, they definitely just Googled, what do I ask a mentor, like 5 minutes before this phone call started, and they're running through that, which is not a bad thing to do, right? But it means that we're not having a tailored conversation. We're having a generic Google conversation, which is better than nothing. But okay, let me talk to this. Let me start asking the questions. Let me start to drive the conversation just for a little bit and then hand the keys back to a young person who hopefully now understands, oh, there's a whole different set of places that they can go. And again, once that knowledge clicks, and it'll click fast because these are smart people. Once it clicks, then they're going to drive the conversation a place that I never anticipated to go. And now we're both having fun and we're both learning for it, and it's a much more effective relationship.
Fantastic. I'd like to follow up on that question on mentorship, though, and add the importance of advocacy, advocates, and sponsors. What are your thoughts on that? And anybody else could jump into, because I think we missed that part. We talk about mentorship, and young people may know about mentorship, but they don't know the importance of advocates and sponsors later on in their career.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm really happy you asked it, because it's super important. And a lot of young people either don't know they can ask for that, or they actively think they shouldn't ask for that. They think that they are asking too much or somehow doing something unethical if they ask you to write, if they ask a mentor to make a job recommendation or to make an introduction to someone who could be their graduate advisor, or to nominate them for an award. And generally speaking, I find most mentors are thrilled to do that. And it's really, really important. And again, this is another area where, for the statistically inclined, which is almost everyone in our industry, the statistics are pretty glaring about the frequency with which different types of people are nominated for awards, and nominated for promotions, and nominated for executive teams. And even if you control for everything you can possibly control for, there are huge systemic biases in all of that. Women never get nominated for awards in technical fields, but anything even remotely approaching the ability by which they've earned it. And so telegraphing to your younger mentees that you're aware of that statistic, that you're happy to write nominations. I often spend a lot of my time encouraging my young mentees to nominate their, please not me, but like their other mentors, their graduate advisors, because a lot of people in marginalized communities have attached themselves to other people in those same marginalized communities, right? So if there's only one female professor in the engineering school at their department, guess who they've sought out at their advisor? I'm like, well, you're allowed to nominate your advisor for an award, right? AIAA has great awards, right? And I don't know what the metrics are. Others on the call might know what the metrics are. I bet not enough women, I bet not enough Black people, I bet not enough non-binary people are nominated for that. If there's someone who's made something to you, it doesn't matter if you're still 19, you can still write a nomination for an award. You could still post on a Facebook page and get other students to write a nomination for an award, and that really does help.
Fantastic. Anyone else wants to answer that question on advocacy and sponsorship and its importance?
I'll just say, at least for large organizations, the internship program, I think, is just a great opportunity to connect people with mentors and help them navigate through this new world that they may be entering into. So we have, tons of interns every year, about 800 each summer. They're generally sophomores, juniors, and some post-grad, those kind of things. But, they come to JPL and it's like, wow, how do I even navigate through all of this? And so each one of them gets a mentor, and that they have contact with that mentor often, multiple times a week, and help them navigate through it. Now, admittedly, they're already probably in aerospace or whatever in terms of college, but still coming out of school and trying to figure out what this is all about and what I want to do with my life. Having that mentor one-on-one, which we very proactively assign and follow up on, is just really important. So if you're in an organization that could put something like that together to make sure that each of those individuals, whether they're coming in on an internship program, work share program, whatever it is, but they have someone they know is looking out for them, and that someone will ideally advocate for them, become an employee in the future. That's an ideal way to make things work. And so that's just one aspect of how to make sure that mentorship relationship exists and how it works well.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Camille, can I
yes,
add a point here? I think one tool organizations can use to really show how important advocacy and sponsorship is succession planning. And I think a succession planning process where you look at your leadership team doesn't be at the top level. It can be at a different level, but and you identify successors for those candidates. I'm guessing most organizations that will be dominated by a single color and a single gender, and so that's the opening you have as a leader to get in and start putting these sponsorship and advocacy programs in to start finding, getting those candidates ready and diverse candidates ready for those leadership roles, because the time to start is right now. So.
Fantastic. Thank you.
I'd like to add on to that really quick.
Yes, go ahead.
So nobody's really touched on mentorship, like in early life, high school, middle school, for example. And I think that's really important as well, especially for the effect it can have on not only the career you choose, right? That's a very big foundational choice. So I think it's very important that at a young age, there are very early life, mentorship programs that are out there, right? Like has been mentioned before, if women or racial minorities or non-binary people, if they've never heard of an aerospace engineer, what is this? They just don't know that these things are out there. They've never had somebody show it to them, explain it to them, and even for the people that maybe do know it's out there, they don't know that it's possible for them. They don't know how to attain it. So I think it's really important that we consider mentorship, even as early as maybe elementary school, really early life mentorship to really build that foundation so they can go where they want to go and see all the possibilities that are out there.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Carson. This question is for Matt. What compelled you to be so heavily involved with WoAA? How have you been an ally for not only women, but women of color? And what have you found to be the most useful tips for supporting your peers who are women and underrepresented individuals while you yourself pursue your professional aspirations?
I think just personally, it's sort of like equality, and I guess especially gender equality has been something that's sort of always been of interest to me. And I can remember just like from when I was young that it's like, whenever there has been sort of a distinction where people have said that, like men can do some things and women can't, or vice versa, that's just something that's always really bothered me. So when when this organization formed, or WIA, which is the University of Maryland's chapter of the organization, formed several years ago, that it's sort of an opportunity that I jumped on because it's something that I've sort of always been passionate about. And then it became a national organization, like the opportunity to sort of bring this initiative forward and reach out to schools that may not have had the program in the first place, and start connecting our membership with mentors in industry. Sort of going back to the last question, is just something that I'm very passionate about. And sorry, I'm forgetting the second part of your question.
It says, what have you found to be most useful tips for supporting your peers who are women and underrepresented individuals while you yourself pursue your professional aspirations?
So yeah, I think the most useful thing is just to, sort of like in a mentorship capacity, to sort of use your connections and know what opportunities are available for them, and make them aware of that, and sort of point people in the right direction based on the position that you're fortunate enough to find yourself in, to help them build themselves up professionally within an organization and within the aerospace industry in general.
Are there a lot of other men in the WoAA organization?
So I think we have one or two others right now, but that's definitely something that we would like to see more of. So I will, I guess, use this platform to say for any men that are interested, you don't have to be a woman to be in this organization. This is for anyone that supports basically equality for all people in aerospace, and making sure that everyone has the same opportunity. So like, definitely don't feel like it's something that you can't do because you're not a woman. Anyone that supports these initiatives and wants to help is welcome, and we'd love to have your help.
I think that's fantastic. So many times our women organizations, we want men at the table helping us fight through these barriers. So that's important. Thank you, Matt. Carson, as a current undergraduate ally, what problems seem most glaring to you with regards to empowerment of women and marginalized individuals within aero and astro engineering at the undergraduate level and extracurricular engineering teams?
Thank you. Yeah, so I'll start off, and for the people that like statistics out there, a couple of years ago, college factual reports the Georgia Tech Aerospace Engineering Department was 14% women. 14%. That is outrageously small. So that's to me, that's a huge glaring problem in statistics. And talking to many of my friends, who are women or racial minorities, they'll talk about how they don't feel comfortable in class asking questions, answering questions. It's when you walk into a room and you are 14% or less, it's extremely difficult to get the same quality of education that other people can get. You don't have, even though you're there in the room, you don't have that same level of access. So that's one of the biggest glaring problems I've seen, which, like I said, is very statistically easy to understand. And there's lots of evidence and testimonials to back that up. I think something from the extracurricular kind of rocket club side, and something that I'm very proud of in my rocket club, Georgia Tech Experimental Rocketry, just the lack of women and people of color and non-binary people in leadership positions. I'm really proud that half of the leads on my rocket team, sub-team leads, are women. I'm extremely proud of that. But I can't say the same for a lot of other aerospace clubs on campus and a lot of other engineering clubs on campus in general. So I would really challenge those clubs to do better. How can you use your technical platform and your clout to make the world more fair and equal, to make your organizations more diverse and show people that they can do these things. And I would also say, what are colleges doing to show, to raise their numbers from 14%, for example? What are they doing to show people that they can do this? How are they going to raise those numbers? Because I'd say it's on the colleges, to raise those numbers, but it's also kind of like I touched on earlier. It's an early life mentorship, which I think really speaks to society as a whole, because a lot of how people decide what they would like to do early on in life, which the next thing that would bring them would be to the undergraduate level, where we see dismally low numbers, is really affected by a lot of societal expectations. If growing up they heard I can't do this, or this because of the way I am, there's nothing I can change about that, then there's no way they're going to be able to go and do those things, because they've never had that support network and they've never believed that was possible for them. So I think, while that's not necessarily something that I directly observe at the undergraduate level, I think you can draw a very straight line from the undergraduate level to early stages in life. Let's see if I answered that completely. Yes.
Yes, I think I absolutely agree with you, and that's a challenge to presidents of universities for sure, to especially predominantly engineering universities, to make sure that they're thinking about that in their recruitment. So thank you. So we're in the home stretch, and this question, we're moving to practicing allyship in the future, right? So we talked about what you all are doing now, and we're looking forward. How will you work to create a truly equitable and inclusive environment for both gender and racial minorities moving forward? And you can focus on what kind of resources are you willing to pour into this? How will you approach recruitment for your organizations? And what are some concrete actionable plans you will take away from not only this panel, but the countless instances of racial minorities lending their voices and sharing their stories? How will you show that you are truly listening? And this is for every one of our panels.
Well, I guess I'll start, Camille. Again, I'll go back to it's about culture, it's about being on a journey, and it's about consistent leadership focusing on this. And so, just specifically in our organization, we have something called employee resource groups. I think that's pretty typical across the industry, but you talked about listening. We try to listen to those groups. They represent women, they represent, minorities, et cetera, non-binary. So we've got employee resource groups, and then we created a council that made up of our executive council that kind of meets with them and helps to integrate and oversee them, to listen. So the listening part is extremely important. Just recently, we asked them to come together and identify 10 key areas that they felt we needed to do better in as a lab. And so we had them come and present that to the executive council. And then we have action plans to go after all those things. And when you show that you're listening, number one, when you show that people have a voice, and when you show that you're willing then to take action based on what you heard, follow up and show and communicate back down that, yes, we heard you, here's what we're doing, here's our plan. Those things go a long way to continuing to build the right culture and environment where everyone feels like, yes, I'm a part of this. The leadership is trying to make it better, and we are trying to empower and improve where we are today and going into tomorrow. So I'll stop there, and I know others have other things, but I can talk about other things later. But that's just one area that we're really focused in, and listening and empowering and providing the resources to take action.
Yeah, thank you so much. At NASA, we have the ERGs too, and they have a very powerful voice in making changes. So thank you for sharing that. What's next?
I'd also go back to, I think, but I forget who, someone was saying earlier about, you know, how important the, you know, sort of early childhood engagement is, especially like for big organizations to reach out to schools that may be in underprivileged areas. Like Lieutenant General James was saying about the LAUSD, you know, make them feel like they're part of this technical community from an early age, and that, you know, that they're not an outsider. And I just know, especially, you know, with women in aerospace, people talk about the problem of the leaky pipeline, where, you know, women are interested in aerospace until usually sometime in middle school or so, and then, well, really in STEM in general, and then tend to lose interest. So I know that's something that we at WoAA are pouring a lot of resources into, is K through 12 outreach to make sure that we're addressing the supply side as well.
Fantastic.
I'd like to add, you know, great points, and what Larry described is what great leaders do. And they get out of their office, they do the skip levels. They go down 2, 3, 4 levels deep in the organization and listen to people, and then decide what to do and take action. And so that develops this culture of trust. And it's just fantastic that it's going on at JPL and at other organizations. I think that's fantastic. I want to just briefly, you know, we mentioned Ascend. I'm the executive producer for Ascend, and the reason I joined AIAA to work on Ascend is to build a platform to, you know, basically a platform that's outcomes focused, that's multidisciplinary, and is going to attract new people, new industries into the space industry. The space industry grow, but only because we can be effective at attracting those new industries and those new people into it. So Ascend is a platform for having these conversations, so that the diversity and inclusion webinars were something we put on because we felt that that was a conversation that had to be had, and we don't think we're done. We think we have to continue. We think the research developed through those 2 webinars, which are recorded and they're available on the Ascend website. We've written up key takeaways from each of the 2 webinars. Those key takeaways are available, and we want to build further resources for industry and for individuals to go out and use. I think those are some key things. I think the third thing, and I think we've heard about WoAA and we've heard about the Brooke Owens Fellowship. There's also the Space Gen Advisory Council and the great events that they put on. There are alums from those organizations that are looking to continue to do something, and we hope that Ascend can be a home for them, a platform to continue, you know, the passionate work that they started in those organizations that are more geared towards current or recent university students. as they go into their career and move into early career, mid-career professions. So thank you.
Thank you. SJC is a phenomenal organization, and they have such a strong voice of young people, and could be a great resource for executives who are recruiting. So thank you for sharing that.
I'd like to add on to that really quick. So as for the question of how you'll approach recruitment in organizations, this is something I've thought about a lot, and unfortunately, recruitment wasn't a high priority for many of the organizations I was in this year, just due to the state of the world. But I've thought of a lot of concrete examples that I plan to implement going forward. Something that I'm really proud of here in the Aero makerspace, which is where I'm sitting, space I'm very proud of, is we do completely blind hiring. I mean, so you'll have two people that interview the candidate, but then when the full committee meets to discuss these candidates, you're really discouraged or plain out not allowed those two people to interview that candidate to talk about their name, their race, their gender, anything like that. They're solely for in that moment, they're just a number to be considered on their merit alone. And I think that does a lot to break down a lot of the implicit biases that we can see in hiring practices or recruiting practices, and above the college level and below the college level. And something I'll speak to, what are some concrete plans I really hope to implement and plan to implement in the coming months after, what I've heard today from some of these fantastic panelists, and after some discussions I've had in the past couple of weeks with some members of the organizations I'm in, is I think it's really valuable to just open lines of dialogue that are often absent in organizations at the collegiate level. Whether it's as simple as just expressing, hey, if you witness something or notice something that is not okay with the way this is run, you have an opinion about this, please come talk to us. Or, whether it's as more on purpose as like a form or something where people can actually submit anonymous stuff like that. What Lieutenant General James said about culture really resonated with me. And I think it's very important and often overlooked at the collegiate level of establishing that culture firmly and early in your organizations. Because that could certainly be the first time that many people have heard a lot of ideas that we've been discussed today. And then they will go out and enter the industry and interact with people in the industry. And it's very important that they understand and embrace the culture that we've talked about today.
Thank you, Carson.
And I'll just say, so I've invested quite a lot in allyship over the last couple of years. And I use the verb invest on purpose. This is not charity. This is an investment that gives back to the organizations that I love, the community I love, to myself, to my family. And I always find the investment sort of metaphorically pays back so well that I always end up doing even more next year than I did this year, although I thought I was tapped out and I thought there was no way I could devote more time to this. One of the nice things about allyship is it doesn't really cost money, or usually it can, but it doesn't need to. It can cost time. Often it can cost just access or brain space. And those things, every single one of us has to give. If some of the folks on this call can find the time to do this in their busy lives, running major companies and premier NASA centers and things like that, then just about everybody can find time to give that kind of access. I'm thrilled that I heard from so many people who are going to be watching this live stream, including a lot of white male executives in aerospace companies who want to learn about this stuff and if they should do it and how they could do it better. So thanks for taking a step and tuning in on a Saturday. I think that's awesome. Some concrete steps that I would recommend, in addition to all the things that have been said previously that I totally agree with. One, we've talked about loving data. Start there. So start by examining your numbers closely. Apply your scientific and engineering and mathematical mind to it in the same way that you would to raising the ISP of your engine or calculating your trajectory adjustment. Look at what are the demographics of your applicant pool versus your hiring pool. Look at what are the applicants of your workforce versus your managerial level workforce. Look at wage gaps and do it frequently. Don't just do it once. I highly encourage you to publish that information, at least to your company, at minimum to the hiring managers within your company. I recommend you do it to the whole company. And frankly, I recommend you do it to the world. We did that at my day job this year, Virgin Orbit. And it was a little bit scary to do it because not all of the numbers are beautiful. Some of them are not very good at all. but we find it's much better to show the world, hey, here's what they are, here's what they were last year, here's the trend. We know what's good, we know what's bad, and here's what we're working on, and please hold us accountable. We were worried that would generate a lot of blowback. The response has been so positive. Please do it. I highly recommend it. Think about the opportunities that you get, particularly if you're an executive already in this industry. You probably get a million invitations to speak on panels, to attend conferences, to be on television, to be on advisory boards. Probably you're bored of all of them. You probably don't want to go to any more conferences. Maybe not so much now because of coronavirus, you haven't been out in a little while, but yield those speaking roles to other people whose voices are not heard. As a general rule, I no longer appear on panels. I made an exception for this one for all the wonderful reasons that you stated up front about why it made sense to have this be a panel of cisgendered white men primarily. That made sense to me, but usually I don't do that because I'm bored. People have already heard me say the same things a million times, and there's someone twice as smart as I am who never gets the invitation, so I pass them off, and I've never regretted that. It's pretty easy to do. Go out and engage in some of the great programs that you've heard about here. Rob has mentioned a bunch of them. Thank you, Rob, for all the shout outs to Rick Owens Fellowship. As always, I appreciate you very, very much. Matthew Isakowitz Fellowship, WoAA, SEDS, Space Generation. These are great programs. You don't have to spend a lot of money. Just find your local chapter and say, hey, are you looking for a guest speaker? Because they all are. Or say, hey, can I buy pizza next time if you've got a little bit of money to throw around? Or say, hey, do you need an introduction? Can I give you a tour when we're allowed to give tours again? It's not a big investment, but it really, really pays off. And then last, just commit your time. Be a mentor to at least one person. Start tomorrow. It ain't that hard. Someone watching this will happily take you up on that. Try it out. Don't expect yourself to be perfect right from the beginning, but learn just like your mentee is learning. And I suspect most of you will get hooked, and you'll find yourself doing it a lot more in the future. So I hope those concrete tips help.
Fantastic, and Will, I'll give that. Say yes. I'll have that be the last word because we are a little over time. I want to thank each of you, Lieutenant General James, Rob Myerson, Will Pomeranz, Matt Marcus, and Carson Corsi. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to talk about the ways in which we can create a more just, equitable, and frankly, compassionate and inclusive workspace, especially in aerospace. It's been my pleasure to moderate this panel, and I thank you so much. And I'll turn it over to Hashini.
Yes, thank you so much, Camille. And thank you so much to all of our amazing panelists for taking time out of your Saturdays to have this really important conversation. And I think with that, we will say good afternoon to everybody, good evening, wherever you are. And, please check out all of the amazing organizations that have been talked about in today's panel. And have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Camille.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.